Hi, my name is Pluni Pennings and I'm an evolutionary biologist interested in drug resistance. When I was a PhD student in Germany about 20 years ago, I often traveled back to my home country, the Netherlands. Once I had stitches from minor surgery on my hand in Germany, and when I was in Amsterdam a few days later, I thought I could get the stitches out in the Netherlands. However, at the hospital, they told me that as a patient who had been in a foreign clinic or hospital, I would have to be quarantined in the hospital before I could be helped by a doctor. I didn't want to be quarantined, and I decided that getting my stitches out could wait a few more days. But so why do hospitals in the Netherlands not want to treat people who come from a German hospital or clinic? The reason is antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Levels of antibiotic resistance are low in the Netherlands and higher in most other countries, including Germany. So the hospitals do not want to have patients import those resistant bacteria from abroad. Today, I would like to tell you about my latest project that aimed to understand why resistance is higher in some countries compared to others, and why in almost none of these countries resistance levels reach 100%. Let's start with the data. Every year, the European Centre for Disease Control, or the European CDC, counts what fraction of bacterial infections are resistant to antibiotics. Here, I focus on the bacterium E. coli and drugs of the class quinolones. The European CDC found that for quinolone antibiotics in 2011 in the Netherlands, 14% of all E. coli infections were resistant. That means that in that year, in about 14% of the patients with an E. coli infection in the Netherlands, quinolone antibiotics did not work. But in Germany, which is right next to the Netherlands, 24% of the E. coli infections were resistant. So an E. coli infection in a German patient is more likely to be resistant to this drug than an infection in a patient in the Netherlands. The researchers of the European CDC also keep track of how many people are treated with a given drug. In the Netherlands, in 2011, quinolone use was estimated to be at 0.8 doses per 1,000 people per day. In Germany, quinolones were used almost twice as often, at 1.5 doses per 1,000 people per day. So in Germany, the antibiotic is used more often, and there is more resistance. In fact, this is a trend across all European countries. Where more of the drug is used, there is more resistance. Where less of the drug is used, there is less resistance. It's possible to draw a line through all of those points. But did you know that scientists actually don't agree on what causes this linear relationship? My paper proposes an explanation for this observation. But before I get into that, let me first tell you why the most basic evolutionary model cannot explain this trend. Basic evolutionary biology predicts a winner-takes-all outcome. This means that either the resistant bacteria take over or the non-resistant ones. This would mean that, for example, in these countries with high usage of the antibiotic, the resistant strains take over and resistance levels should be very high, near 100%. On the other hand, in these countries with low usage of the antibiotic, resistance levels would be expected to be low, near 0%, because the non-resistant strains win. But this is not at all what we see for quinolone resistance in E. coli. We see that in every country, both resistant and non-resistant bacteria coexist. So the simplest evolutionary biology models cannot explain these observations. Now let me tell you about the model that I propose in my new paper. I think that when no drug is present, most resistant bacterial strains are not as fit, in the evolutionary sense, as the non-resistant strains. The competition with non-resistant strains makes resistance levels go down. But at the same time, new resistant strains are created by evolution. Whenever someone is taking this antibiotic, there's a chance that the bacteria inside their body evolve to become resistant to the antibiotic. And this leads to resistance levels going up. If more people are taking the antibiotic, more new resistant strains are created, and the upward force is stronger. The resistant fraction we see in a given country is the result of an equilibrium between new resistant strains that are created and resistant strains being outcompeted by the non-resistant strains. In countries with higher usage of antibiotics, this equilibrium ends up being higher than in the countries with lower usage of antibiotics. My paper shows that mathematically, this model can explain the linear relationship between usage and resistance levels. I can't prove that this is actually what's happening. For that, more research is needed. But I think that this model should be considered as a serious contender when we try to understand and predict resistance levels. Maybe more important, if more antibiotic use leads to more resistance, does it help if a country reduces its use of antibiotics? In fact, many European countries have made big efforts over the last 15 years or so to reduce their usage of antibiotics. And as a result, between 2011 and 2022, 16 of the 20 largest European countries have reduced their use of quinolone antibiotics. And as a result, in 15 of these 16 countries, resistance levels have indeed gone down. This is great news. You can see here that in all of those cases, resistance levels went down between 2011 and 2022. In addition, in 3 countries of the 20 largest European countries, treatment levels for quinolone drugs went up, and as expected in these countries, resistance levels also went up. When I have first made this plot from available data from the European CDC, it made me very happy, because it means that these efforts to reduce how much antibiotics we use actually have an impact on resistance levels. So when we improve how we use antibiotics, we can make sure that we're not headed to a future where all bacteria are resistant to all antibiotics. If you'd like to learn more, have a look at my paper. It's published open access, so you can download it for free from the journal Epidemics. And while I'm the sole author of the paper, I benefited a lot from help from colleagues and friends, including people who encouraged me to work on this topic, people who discovered embarrassing mistakes in the paper before it was published, and people who helped me make the figures and make the writing super clear. The work was done at San Francisco State University and at the University of Montpellier in France. Thank you for watching.